Thank you for having me today, and I'm pleased to be with you all. So I will be discussing some of the benefit programs. There are 40 to 50 different kinds of benefits available to workers, depending on how you're counting and what you're counting, but I'll only be discussing a few of them today. And for each of them, I'm going to try to provide a little bit of the policy context or a little bit information about the debate. The Employee Benefit Research Institute was founded in 1978. We are a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit dedicated to promoting sound employee benefit design and policy through objective research and education. So with that, let's get started. I just double check, you can see the chart, right? The next slide.
Not yet. One more screen forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that should be good. So we ask this question on an annual basis in our worker survey. It's a hypothetical question. If you were given $600, how would you allocate this money across 6 different benefit types? And so, as I mentioned, we're not going to be covering all of the benefits that are available, but this is specific to 6 benefits that are kind of high priority on the debate at a policy level and being considered by many employers today. So as we can see, the amount that has been allocated in this hypothetical scenario to retirement savings overall over the last 3 years, it's averaged about 1/3, but we do see that it's kind of declining. And as the allocation to retirement savings has declined in this hypothetical scenario, emergency savings has increased. On a dollar basis, workers told us in 2023 that they would dedicate $192 to a retirement savings account, $171 to emergency savings, and $89 to an HSA. So it's still promising that many workers do consider retirement savings one of the higher priorities in this scenario. And so with that, I'll move on to the next slide, where we start to look at some of the headlines that we're seeing today. So here is a headline that came out not too long ago, that US adults are expecting that they need about 1.5 million to retire comfortably, a significant increase from the year before. That's not our number. We do have slightly different numbers. And one of the themes of today's talk is that when you see the headlines, always go to the source and try to look at the numbers that aren't the headlines, the ones that aren't always published, because there is a lot of times you'll find that the numbers can be reported in an optimistic way or from a pessimistic viewpoint. So that's one of the themes of today, to look behind the numbers and think of whether you're going to be the glass is half full kind of person or the glass is half empty. However, when we look at the savings needed, what people think are needed for retirement, we see this discrepancy about expectations versus reality. And we've seen this in other work as well. So workers can consistently kind of overestimate the amount of savings that they think that they're going to need. And while retirees often, generally and consistently report that they would need less money in retirement. And so one of the reasons for this, like in terms of the expected and actually realized retirement confidence, has to do with the healthcare costs in retirement. And so here are some of the headlines that are generated from a report that we recently released that looks at projected healthcare expenses in retirement. It's a simulation model. And one of the reasons why you would find some discrepancies between workers and retirees and how much they think that they're going to need in retirement. So when we first ran the model, and this is generating savings targets for Medicare beneficiaries, so persons that turn age 65 and are on Medicare. We do it 2 different ways. Here we're looking at individuals that are enrolled in Medigap. These are the premiums that they're paying. and the healthcare costs, the expenses in retirement. So that is on the y-axis, and we'll see that if the couple wants to have a 90% chance of covering their healthcare costs in retirement, and for an average premium, they'll need $413,000. And this number was quite really picked up in the media quite a lot. And so this is significantly different than those that are enrolled in Medicare Advantage. And we know that there's some trade-offs between premiums and out-of-pocket expenses here, but there's also a growing preference for Medicare Advantage. And so it's just important to know when you see the big numbers in the headlines to know what's behind them. So in this instance, we ran the same simulation model for those enrolled in Medicare Advantage, and the bars here are whether they have low usage of their services, average usage, or high usage of care. The amount, the savings target needed drops pretty substantially from that $413,000 number for Medigap to $250,000 to have a for your Medicare beneficiaries, Medicare Advantage enrollees, have a 90% chance of covering healthcare expenses in retirement. So these numbers can be very big and can be very alarming to young workers. And that has created really a dialogue and a debate about retirement crisis. And you'll see that in kind of like daily headlines and a lot of policy proposals that could upend the current 401k system, replace it, modify it, make significant changes. And so it's just important to know that EBRI, our mission is really to promote sound employee benefit design and policy. And our research, much of our research is publicly available, and it's very important to see both sides of the story and to come up with an objective and level perspective on your own. So on the right, you'll see there, over the last 30 years, this is an annual survey that we've fielded in collaboration with Greenwald Research on Americans' retirement confidence. And you'll see that about 2/3 of Americans have said that they feel very or somewhat confident in their retirement outlook from a financial standpoint over the last 30 years. And this is a different sample size every 30 years. So it's very consistent. And you'll see that at the periods of decline, those were periods of kind of like market crises with the 2008 recession, and then a little bit of, not necessarily a crisis, but the impact of inflation on consumer sentiment was very significant in 2023. So, but overall, the general trend is that there's been a steady group of Americans that feel confident financially about their prospects. And this is sort of at odds with some of the headlines that you might see. So thinking about some of these headlines, one of our flagship methodologies is called the Retirement Security Projection Model, RSPM. This model, it's a simulation, it's a Monte Carlo simulation on all of American households. It's based on the census data. We've used it to analyze various market and policy innovations over the years, such as the impact of state-run plans on retirement income adequacy, the impact of adding private equity to target date portfolios. We've looked at, earlier it was mentioned, some of the auto enrollment mandates. We're coming out with a new report shortly on the impact of some of the auto enrollment features on retirement income adequacy in the next month or so. So we've modeled many different kinds of policy and market innovations using this, and its output is often used in policy and in employee benefits design. And so now I'm going to go back to, are you the glass is half full kind of person, or the glass is half empty? Because depending on, what your viewpoint is, you can say 4 in 10, based on the RSPM, are projected to run short of money in retirement, or you could say 6 in 10 are expected to have sufficient money in retirement. And likewise, the bar chart on the right shows us some of the aggregate results from the RSPM. This comes from the most recent publication from the TIA Institute, which we worked on, and that was called The Impact of HSAs on Retirement Income Adequacy. So if you're, in the camp that the retirement system needs to be overhauled, you might focus on the 3.5 trillion, or if you're in the camp that, it's a good system and we just need to make some minor improvements, you might focus more on the surplus and the net outcomes. So, but we know many are concerned of the 3.5 trillion aggregate shortfall, the 4 in 10 who are falling behind, because if we weren't, we wouldn't have all of these provisions that we saw in the Secure 2.0. So who's more likely to be on track? This should not come as a surprise to anyone, but white men, higher income, and those with, when we model it, those with decades of DC eligibility ahead of them. So we do believe, and we are firm in this, that DC eligibility is critical to having retirement income adequacy over the long term. And who's less likely to be on track? The groups that should receive some positive benefits from the Secure 2.0 provisions: women, Black and Hispanic Americans, those with fewer years of eligibility, and lower income. So at the very beginning, we had this chart, the hypothetical $600 allocation. Emergency savings came in second, and it had increased over the last few years. So importantly, we know that the individuals that are have emergency savings issues, they have liquidity issues, and many of them are tapping their 401k to address some of these liquidity issues. And there are policy provisions like the PLESAs, the Pension Linked Emergency Savings Act. There's a $1,000 hardship distribution option, and then there's out-of-plan emergency savings options. So we've taken a look at just kind of the general concept of these financial stresses, and we've looked at 401k loans and the impact of spending spikes on 401k and credit behavior. And so these studies, in addition to the several other ones that I mentioned, are all available on EBRI.org. But I just want to mention some things about the loans. If we look at a longitudinal basis, a sample of consistent participants in the 401k plans, we find that 29%, close to 1 in 3, has taken a loan at some point. And among those, 55% have taken a multiple loan. So repeat loan behavior is a problem. And when we look at emergency savings behavior, we do find significant relationships between those that have maxed out their credit cards and then are taking 401k loans. And so these spending spikes, when spending is above your normal spending in any given month, they do lead to what might be considered imprudent financial behaviors. And emergency savings are seen as a way to help kind of balance that cash flow. So, just to underscore this, in the workplace wellness survey, and going back to how some, workers are kind of putting, shifting preferences is what we're observing, that a top stress-causing financial issue is having savings in the case of a financial emergency. And you'll see that saving enough for retirement is, it's still 45%, but it's the third. And in prior years, saving enough for retirement has held the top spot. So this could be generational shifts. This could be, other shifts in terms of composition of the workforce, but it's becoming a more prominent issue over time. So the last thing that I kind of want to go back to is that the idea that workers told us they would allocate 10% of that $600 to buy additional paid time off. And who is paid time off good for? So many of these groups that may not be on track to have a secure retirement, specifically, women, people of color, caregivers, individuals with disabilities. So work-life balance is very critical, and there's caregiving is relatively high on the policy agenda, the domestic agenda right now. There's a number of policy initiatives that are in place. The Administration for Community Living is dedicating a lot of resources to improving the workplace and financial security of caregivers. EBRI has done a significant amount of research in this area as well. And then there's also a great amount of policy innovation. We've seen paid medical leave paid family leave come out from states. We've seen Washington State enact a long-term care tax, essentially, for future retirees. That should help offset some of the burden of caregiving. But we do find that caregivers, as your employees, are financially stressed. They are borrowing money to give to their care recipient. It's impacting their ability to save retirement, and it all is related to mental health. And so we went through kind of the four key parts of that savings allocation, the benefit allocation, that $600. Retirement savings is still at the top, but it's quickly being challenged by emergency savings. HSAs are probably not getting as much allocation as they should be, given the projected healthcare expenses in retirement. And paid time off and the importance of work-life balance is significant for many workers and will continue to be so. So that really concludes my remarks for today, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, when we talked earlier, I felt as though the opportunity to talk to our plan sponsors about how their, consideration of their own population of participants and the plans that they're offering, and maybe considering ways in which they can either encourage participation based on those needs. Some of the points that you mentioned, particularly with caregiving and so on. So I think that was really valuable. Thank you so much for coming and sharing that. Did have a question. Someone had a question about the first slide that you shared, where we were talking about if employees had an extra $600 of benefits in a month, where would they put that? There was a question about the other. What do you think is in the other category? Do you have any insight as to what is an other?
Yeah, the other category was actually related to student loans and college costs. So any benefit that could help offset like a cost of tuition or a student loan payment. And we have also done research on the student loan impact on defined contribution participants. It's quite significant.